In November 2017, a young sex worker left her home for an appointment that promised a higher payment than usual. She mentioned she would be traveling to another city and stayed in touch during the trip. After a late-night call, her phone stopped transmitting a signal. The next day, her body was found in a hotel room. What initially seemed like an isolated crime began to reveal a broader pattern when police reconstructed routes, reviewed cameras, and tracked a vehicle that had crossed a toll booth. Every record, every image, and every fake get into a structure that didn't start that night or end there. Today we are going to reconstruct how cameras and DNA allowed us to identify the person responsible, and how a technical investigation managed to stop a sequence that could have continued. If you want to know all the details, stay with us until the end of the video. The case of Genesis Gibson. Every day we live alongside evil. We witness the darkest side of human behavior. The suffering caused by one individual to others is a constant presence in our society. In Criminal Investigators, we will delve into that dark side of humanity. We will bring the most perverse crimes to the screen and try to get inside the minds of those beings who commit the most terrible acts. I'm Guillermo, and today I bring you another case. But before we begin, I want you to tell me where you're watching us from. We really like to know how far these stories reach. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share this video if you think someone else might be interested. And now, let's begin. On Thursday, November 16, 2017, Genesis, a 24-year-old Venezuelan woman, left Querétaro for the city of Puebla. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share this video if you think someone else might be interested. And now, let's begin. On Thursday, November 16, 2017, Genesis, a 24-year-old Venezuelan woman, left Querétaro for the city of Puebla. She had been living in Mexico for 3 years and working as a sex worker. She was driving her vehicle, a Mazda 3, to meet a client who, as was later learned, had offered her a payment that was double her usual rate. The meeting was scheduled at the Punta Palmas Motel in Puebla, nearly a 4-hour drive from her home. During the trip, Genesis kept in phone contact with her mother. The last recorded contact occurred at approximately 8:30 p.m. that same day. After that call, her phone stopped transmitting a signal and was turned off. Hours later, her family, unable to reach her, began to worry. After confirming that her phone remained off, they went to the authorities to report her missing. The next day, Friday, November 17, 2017, at approximately 1:30 p.m., employees of the Platino Motel, located in Mexico City, entered room 107 to clean after the shift change. Inside, they found the lifeless body of a woman. The victim was gagged and bound, showing signs of strangulation and multiple stab wounds. Obscene words had been carved into her back with a sharp object. The room also contained women's clothing and personal items. Preliminary identification was made thanks to 2 distinctive tattoos: her daughter's name on her left hand and her mother's name behind her right ear. Later, family members officially confirmed that the body was Genesis. But before continuing with the investigation, it's worth knowing a bit about this woman to understand how she ended up in such a disastrous situation. Genesis Ulianis Gibson Jaimes was born in Venezuela and grew up in Catia La Mar in Vargas State, a coastal area in the north of the country. She came from a home with divorced parents and had a sister with whom she shared a close relationship. She was studying foreign trade and also dabbled in modeling. She was the mother of a girl named Nicole. In 2014, at age 21, she decided to emigrate to Mexico with her sister. The decision was motivated by the economic crisis Venezuela was going through. Initially, she left her daughter in her mother's care, with the intention of establishing herself and later reuniting the family. They settled in Querétaro, where they shared a home with other young women. Over time, They began to offer services as elite escorts through the Zona Divas website. On that site, Genesis advertised under the pseudonym Latifa Karesh. Her profile gained popularity on the platform. According to testimonies, she was considered one of the most in-demand girls. Sometime later, she managed to save enough money to bring her mother and daughter to Mexico. The family lived together again in Querétaro, in a middle-class residential area. According to neighbors' statements, Genesis spent little time at home and had little social interaction in the neighborhood. However, among her colleagues, she was known for taking safety precautions. They used to hire trusted taxi drivers who would transport them and wait for them during their appointments. Returning to the investigation, there was an immediate contradiction in the case. Genesis had left for Puebla, but her body appeared in Mexico City, and her Mazda 3 vehicle was not located at that time. After Genesis's identity was confirmed on November 17, 2017, the prosecutor's office focused its initial efforts on the Punta Palmas motel in Puebla, the last place she had been seen alive. The establishment's security cameras confirmed that Genesis entered the motel on the night of November 16 driving her vehicle. She checked into a room under her name. Minutes later, the recordings showed that she moved to another room within the same complex, where a man was waiting for her. That man had not registered with her. According to information gathered later, he had checked into another room using a fake name. The images showed that once they managed to communicate, they left the man's room, not the one registered in Genesis's name. That circumstance created a key irregularity. Officially, there was no record of Genesis leaving the motel, since the room in her name was never formally checked out at the front desk. Employees could not specify the exact time she left the place. The motel's external cameras established that a red Chevrolet vehicle was parked at the location for several minutes on the night of November 16th. The car did not belong to Genesis. Meanwhile, the discovery of the body in Mexico City made it necessary to reconstruct the route between Puebla and the capital. Inside room 107 of the Platino Motel, where the body was found, forensics located a toll receipt from the Mexico-Puebla highway. The receipt indicated the exact time a vehicle had crossed the toll booth. This data allowed investigators to request the toll camera footage. The images showed the same red Chevrolet previously captured at the Puebla Motel. The vehicle was thus linked to both points of the investigation: the last place Genesis was seen alive and the route to Mexico City. The next step was to identify the driver. Based on the images obtained from the toll booth and the Puebla Motel, authorities managed to identify the red Chevrolet. The vehicle was registered to operate as an Uber. The driver was located and summoned to testify. In his statement, he reported that on November 16, 2017, he had received a service request in Mexico City. A man hired him to drive him to the Punta Palmas motel in Puebla. According to the driver, upon arriving at the establishment, the passenger asked him to wait. He indicated that he would come down with a woman and would then need a ride back to Mexico City. Minutes later, the man returned accompanied by a young woman who matched Genesis's physical description. Both got into the vehicle and began the journey to the capital. The driver stated that he dropped them off at the Platino Motel in Mexico City, and after that, he had no further contact with them. This testimony allowed investigators to establish the sequence of events. Genesis left the Puebla Motel with the man, got into the Uber, and was transported to Mexico City during the night of November 16th. With this information, the investigation focused on the Platino Motel. The establishment's security cameras showed that at 10:25 p.m. on November 16th, a man and a woman entered. The woman was wearing a blue jacket that matched the one Genesis was wearing when she left Puebla. The man registered using the name Omar and paid in cash. He was carrying a backpack. The recordings also showed that at 2:20 a.m. on November 17th, the man left the motel alone. In the images, he is seen wearing the same blue jacket the woman had worn when entering. There is no visual record of Genesis leaving the place. At 6:30 a.m., when the room was due to be vacated, employees entered after receiving no response and found the body. With these elements, registration under a fake name, leaving alone, changing clothes, and traveling between cities, the investigation shifted from a missing person case to identifying the man who had accompanied Genesis in her final hours. But the lack of documents made direct identification difficult. However, the security cameras provided clear images of his face and physical build. Additionally, the manager of the establishment remembered that the subject was carrying a backpack when he entered. While the genetic analysis progressed in the lab, investigators requested the geolocation of the cell phones linked to Genesis. The device stopped transmitting a signal after arriving in Mexico City. Months later, those efforts would lead to a specific name. Before we continue, let's take a quick break. If you're finding this video interesting, I invite you to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. That really helps us to keep making more videos and telling these kinds of true stories. That said, let's get back to the story. On March 21, 2018, 22-year-old Daniel Uribe Reyes was arrested in Mexico City. The man resided in Mexico City and, according to police records, was involved in drug dealing. Authorities linked him operationally to the criminal organization known as Unión Tepito, where he allegedly carried out activities related to drug distribution and violent hits. The arrest was initially executed for drug offenses related to dealing, which allowed authorities to keep him in custody while consolidating the evidence for Genesis's femicide. According to investigations, Daniel operated in the capital and allegedly had links to Unión Tepito, a criminal organization in which he was identified as a hitman. Once identified as the man captured by cameras in Puebla and at the Platino Motel, the prosecutor's office proceeded to request scientific tests to place him directly at the crime scene. At that point, the investigation shifted from reconstructing roots to forensic confirmation of his involvement. After the arrest, the prosecutor's office requested a DNA sample to compare with the genetic material collected in room 107 of the Platino Motel and on Genesis's body. Daniel initially refused to provide the sample. Faced with the refusal, the public prosecutor's office requested a court order to legally compel him to provide biological material. A judge authorized the request. The sample was obtained and sent to the laboratory for comparative analysis. The result established a match between Daniel's genetic profile and the DNA found both on the victim's body and on evidence collected at the crime scene. The scientific match placed him directly in physical contact with Genesis during the events. In parallel, a geolocation analysis of the cell phones was conducted. Records indicated that Daniel's device was in the same locations as Genesis's on the night of November 16, 2017. First in Puebla and later in Mexico City. The temporal match reinforced the sequence established through cameras and the Uber driver's testimony. With video surveillance images, hotel registration under a fake name, the driver's statement, genetic match, and phone geolocation, the prosecutor's office considered the formal charge for Genesis's femicide complete. But Genesis had not been this man's only victim. During the comprehensive review of the case, investigators noticed similarities with other homicides of women who worked as sex workers in the same area. Upon reviewing homicide files with similar characteristics, the prosecutor's office detected a case that occurred months before Genesis's murder. On February 4, 2017, The body of Wendy Vanesca de Lima Cortez, a 26-year-old Venezuelan woman, was found in a hotel room in Mexico City. Wendy also offered services as an escort through the Zona Divas portal, where she advertised under the pseudonym Monica Valenca. Her body was located after the room's rental time expired. She had a gunshot wound to the head. The method differed partially from Genesis's case, but there were significant similarities. Prior contact through a digital portal, checking in with a man who used a fake name, and the companion leaving the hotel before the discovery. The establishment's security cameras recorded Wendy entering with a man who provided the name Jaime Rodriguez when checking in. He did not present official identification. They remained in the room for approximately 90 minutes. Later, the man left the hotel alone. When employees entered to clean, they found the lifeless body. With this information, investigators reviewed the recordings and registry books of the hotel where Wendy was found. The physical build of the man captured on video matched Daniel's. Additionally, handwriting experts compared the signature in this hotel's registry book with the registration in Puebla. The analysis concluded that the handwriting belonged to the same person. With those elements, the prosecutor's office formally charged Daniel as also responsible for Wendy's femicide. The investigation no longer pointed to an isolated event, but to a pattern. With 2 cases built, the prosecutor's office ordered a review of previous homicides of women who worked as sex workers and showed operational similarities: recruitment through digital portals, entering hotels with a companion, use of aliases, and subsequent discovery by employees. One of the reopened files was that of a 28-year-old Mexican woman named Katia. She had returned to sex work after a period of inactivity due to financial difficulties. She was murdered in a hotel under circumstances that, on the surface, shared structural similarities: a private appointment and death inside a room. However, upon reviewing the file, investigators found a decisive limitation. No useful genetic profile had been obtained from the scene, and the establishment did not have security cameras to identify the companion. There were also no records that could be subjected to handwriting analysis. Without technical evidence placing Daniel at the scene, the case could not be prosecuted against him. The homicide of Karen Aylan, an Argentine citizen known as Dana, which occurred in December 2017, was also examined. Karen, like Genesis and Wendy, advertised on digital portals and was found dead in a hotel room. There was a relevant contextual element. Karen and Genesis knew each other and had a close relationship. However, the file presented evidentiary obstacles. The cause of death differed in substantial ways from the other cases, and furthermore, the body was buried before all forensic examinations were completed, which limited the collection of complementary evidence. No genetic or documentary match was established to directly link Daniel. With that background, the prosecutor's office formally limited the indictment to 2 specific events: the femicide of Wendy and that of Genesis. With the formal indictment, the public prosecutor's office presented the set of evidence obtained during the investigation to the court. In Genesis's case, the charge was supported by the genetic match between Daniel's DNA and the samples collected from the victim's body and in the Platino motel room, as well as the video surveillance recordings showing him entering with her and leaving the place alone during the early hours of November 17, 2017. To this was added the phone geolocation analysis that placed his device in Puebla and later in Mexico City during the interval in which the travel occurred. Regarding Wendy's case, the prosecutor's office incorporated the recordings from the hotel, where the accused was observed registering with the victim under a fake name and leaving without her shortly after. The guest book was subjected to handwriting analysis, which determined that the writing matched the same person, linked to other registrations used by Daniel in similar establishments. The repeated use of aliases, the physical match on video, and the expert analysis allowed the second file to be integrated. During the trial, the defense tried to question the validity of the hotel records and visual identification, arguing that official documentation was not required in those establishments. However, the genetic evidence in Genesis's case constituted a direct physical link that reinforced the rest of the evidence and consolidated the prosecution. Finally, on April 12, 2019, the court handed down a guilty verdict against Daniel Uribe Reyes. He was sentenced to 80 years in prison, 35 years for Wendy's femicide, which occurred in February 2017, and 45 years for Genesis's femicide, which occurred in November of the same year. However, the investigation left an open question. The review of other files with similar characteristics did not allow for more charges due to a lack of sufficient evidence. The detected pattern, contact through digital portals, use of aliases, hotels with minimal controls, suggests a repeated method, but only 2 cases could be sustained in court. Wendy and Genesis were not victims of an isolated event, but of a sequence that was only interrupted when a technical reconstruction managed to identify the person responsible. The resolution of the case depended on active cameras, preserved records, and biological evidence recovered in time. Without those elements, both files would likely have met the fate of others that remain unsolved. The conviction closed the judicial process, but doubts about additional potential victims remain open. The case highlighted an element that ran through the entire investigation: the use of digital portals as a means of contact between clients and women who worked as sex workers. Platforms like Zona Divas functioned as virtual showcases where escorts posted photos, rates, and contact methods. For many, they represented a tool for economic autonomy and direct client acquisition. However, they also reduced safety filters to minimal mechanisms that depended almost exclusively on individual precaution. Sex work, practiced in contexts of migratory vulnerability and economic need, often takes place in legal and operational gray areas. Many women implement their own protection measures: trusted drivers, shared location, client verification. But those strategies do not eliminate the risk when the attacker plans and exploits structural flaws in the system. Wendy and Genesis were able to get justice because there were records, cameras, and genetic material. In the absence of those elements, the story would likely have been different. And well, dear audience, that's another investigation. What do you think of today's case? We would really like to read your comments, as your opinion on the cases is very important to us. Remember to always do so with the utmost respect, both for the victim and for other viewers and us who will be reading them. Before you go, leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, don't forget to share this video if you think someone you know might be interested. See you in another criminal investigation. Goodbye.